Leah and Rachel loved and overlooked. Leah and Rachel were sisters, daughters of one family, both loved by their father, both loved by their mother. Both were beautiful in their own way. Both had hopes and dreams for the future. But while they were both very different, their lives would end up being strikingly similar. Let me explain. In the Bible, we meet Leah first. Now it seems that Leah was not as pretty as her sister Rachel. In fact, it says that Rachel was beautiful in form, meaning physically, while Leah was not. And I think it's important to point out that both Leah and Rachel knew that they were beautiful in their own way. Because it actually says that Leah was beautiful in character, meaning she was beautiful in how she acted. She was beautiful in her spirit. This, however, did not stop their father from showing favoritism towards Rachel, the beautiful one. It even says that he, their father, loved Rachel more than Leah. One day, their father arranged for them to be married to two brothers. These two brothers were from the family of Laban, and their names were Jacob and Esau. Now, it was customary back then that the older brother would marry the younger brother's first wife, and then the younger brother would marry after the older brother. So in this case, Jacob would marry first, and then Esau would marry. And the interesting thing here is that Leah, the less attractive sister, was to marry the older brother, and Rachel, the most attractive sister, was to marry the younger brother. However, their father made a terrible mistake. He accidentally tricked Leah into marrying the wrong brother. As a result, Leah ended up marrying Jacob, the younger brother, and Rachel ended up marrying Isaac, the older brother. Now, Leah found herself married to a man who was not supposed to be her husband. She quickly became very resentful towards her father and her sister. We see this resentment in chapter 30, when she curses them and says, "The God of my father, the God of Abraham, the fear of Isaac. He will give a blessing to me by heaps, and to my children he will give a multitude, and to my offspring a great company." So Leah ends up having 4 sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. The names of these 4 sons come together to form an acronym in Hebrew which spells out Jacob. Why? Because when Leah looked at her 4 sons, she said, "Surely now my husband will rejoice, since the Lord has seen that. I am hated and has therefore given me 4 sons." So she named them after her husband. However, all the while Rachel remained childless, and she desperately wanted to have children. You see, back then, to be a woman meant that you had to have children. And Rachel felt like she was incomplete, because she didn't have any children. So she started competing with her sister in a very unhealthy way. And if you want to know why, all you need to do is look at what Rachel said in chapter 30, verse 1. She said, "Give me children, or else I'll go childless and die." Now, I don't blame Rachel for wanting to have children, but I do blame her for the way she went about getting them. Because instead of praying to God like Leah did, Rachel took matters into her own hands and did something very sneaky. She went behind Leah's back and gave her maid Bilhah to her husband Jacob. And then when Leah found out, she did the same thing and gave her maid Zilpah to Jacob. What happened next was that both Leah and Rachel ended up having children through their maids. And this created a big rivalry between them. And it was until Leah had 6 sons, and Rachel still had none, that Jacob asked God what was going on. And God told him that it was because Rachel was hated. So God gave Rachel 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin, and Leah continued to have more children, bringing the total number of Jacob's sons to 12. Now, this is where things get really interesting. Because while Leah ended up having many sons, she was still hated by her father, her sister, and her husband. And Rachel, who was loved by everyone, ended up dying while giving birth to Benjamin, leaving her to become the only one of the 12 sons of Jacob to never have a father. In other words, Rachel was loved, but died before she could see her son grow up, while Leah was hated but lived long enough to see all of her sons grow up, including her favorite son Judah, the ancestor of Jesus Christ. And even though Leah and Rachel ended up having strikingly similar fates, their stories have been interpreted in very different ways. In fact, there is a popular belief among many Christians that Leah represents spiritual Israel and Rachel represents spiritual Judah. Now, what I mean by spiritual Israel is the people who claim to be descendants of Jacob. It's also known as the Jews. But the truth is that the majority of Jews today can trace their bloodline back to Judah and not to Israel. In fact, some scholars estimate that 90% of Jewish families today are descended from Judah, while only 10% are descended from Israel. As a result, many people believe that Leah represents the people of Israel, who broke God's law and murdered Jesus, while Rachel represents the people of Judah, who eventually believed in Jesus. However, it's important to note that this interpretation is not found anywhere in the Bible. It's just something that many Christians came up with later on. And it's based on the idea that Leah and Rachel represent two different types of people, the hated and the beloved. For example, we see this interpretation in the writings of the church father Jerome, who wrote the following: Leah is the symbol of Israel, which rejected the Lord and was left barren. And Rachel is the symbol of Judah, which received the Lord and was blessed with sons. However, there's absolutely no evidence to support this claim that Leah represents the people of Israel and that Rachel represents the people of Judah. And it's quite ironic that many Christians believe this because the Bible clearly states that both Leah and Rachel were daughters of Jacob, meaning that they both represent the people of Israel. In other words, both sisters represent the nation of Israel, not just Leah. And what the Bible wants to show us is that even though Leah was the least likely candidate to be considered the most blessed, she was the one who ended up receiving the greatest blessing of all. See, while Rachel was the most beautiful and the most beloved, it was Leah who was the most blessed by God. And this teaches us a powerful lesson. It teaches us that sometimes God chooses to bless those who seem overlooked, forgotten, and unloved. In fact, this is a recurring theme throughout the entire Bible. For example, we see it when God chose David, a young boy who was overlooked by everyone, to defeat the giant Goliath. Or when God chose the small nation of Israel to be his special possession, despite them being surrounded by much larger and more powerful nations. And even when it comes to salvation, God chose to save sinners who could not save themselves instead of righteous people who thought they deserved it. And this should encourage us because it means that no one is beyond God's grace. It doesn't matter how overlooked, forgotten, or unloved you may feel right now. If God can bless Leah, he can certainly bless you. Speaking of feeling unloved and overlooked, let me ask you this. Do you ever feel like no one cares about you? Do you ever feel alone, forgotten, or unimportant? If you do, please know that you are not alone. There is someone who cares about you more than you can imagine. And that someone is Jesus Christ, the one who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Jesus loves you. He has a plan for your life, and he wants to give you a hope and a future. If you would like to know more about Jesus and what he can do for you, I invite you to watch our video called Why Jesus Came to Earth. This is a video that I recorded especially for people who don't know Jesus yet. And in it, I explain the reason why Jesus had to die on the cross. To watch the video, all you have to do is click on the link provided. And if you have any questions about God, Jesus, or the Bible, please leave a comment below, and we'll make a video answering your question. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Want more? Download detailed ebooks at www.downloadhaven.online. Start downloading now.